The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows. Hi, I'm Thomas Sanjurjo, and you're listening to The Secrets of Classic Science Fiction, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings of this genre of movies. Joining me today on the panel are Dom Bettinelli. Hi, Dom.
Hi, Thomas.
And David Handlos. Hi, David.
Hello.
All right, so this is a good crew. I'm looking forward to this one. You can follow The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, your favorite podcast app, or YouTube. Make sure to hit the bell on YouTube to get notifications. And we'd also like to, before we start, mention one of the other shows that if you are interested in this classic sci-fi kind of realm, would definitely be interesting to you. So Dom, if you could.
Yeah, if you're interested in classic sci-fi movies and mysteries and all that sort of stuff, you need to check out Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Jimmy and I cover all kinds of mysteries, natural, supernatural, from a faith and reason perspective. We're all over the place with this, and you would definitely need to check it out. You can find it wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/mysterious.
Awesome. Thank you. So the premise for the show is kind of presented as pre-Star Wars sci-fi. And I just wanted to bring that up because, Star Wars changed literally everything, not only about the science fiction genre, but about the way that movies are made. So almost every blockbuster since has been a sci-fi movie of some type, I would hazard, especially the modern day with like the Marvel movies that are coming out. So we almost take it for granted now that a movie is going to have a lot of futuristic special effects if it's going to be a summer blockbuster, and that goes all the way back to I remember growing up seeing Independence Day and movies like that were definitely inspired by Star Wars. So how about you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think back to just, whenever, even movies like The Lord of the Rings, which is not science fiction, it's still sort of inspired by the grand spectacle and effects driven, grand epic movie of that sort. It's still, and you're right, Star Wars changed everything about not even just science fiction, but the movie business in general. You can really look at it and go, this was everything before Star Wars, and this is everything after. It's really wild.
Yeah, it really brought, I think this was before we actually hit record, but Star Wars is what you call a space opera, and before then they'd have there weren't overarching stories that were told across movies. There was a sequel, which was just another movie,
another adventure,
another adventure,
right, yeah.
And to just there could be some kind of serialized thing, but there wasn't one grand story. It was just different things that could be told out of order for all you care.
Right. It just involved the same guys. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's outside of even science fiction movies. That's like everything. You think about James Bond, pre-Star Wars, it was just James Bond. No big deal. And even now James Bond is like, you have to watch a few of them in order to make sure that you know what's going on in each one.
Right. If you watch the last Daniel Craig, you won't. It references stuff from the first Daniel Craig movie from over a decade ago, and you won't know what's going on if you haven't watched it. So yeah, that idea of the serialized story over movies, yeah, that's also sort of something from Star Wars that it did to us. Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that one. Wow, that's amazing. So I think to kind of start off, pre-Star Wars science fiction was very genred. It was like it had a very specific feel to it. And that's kind of where I want to break these up because it's a lot of room to cover, but I want to talk about kind of the general sense of what was going on, and definitely mention stuff that there's a few movies in here that I hadn't heard of, and a couple of movies that I haven't seen, even though I should. So I know I'm going to get ripped for that when the time comes, but I figured that we're all kind of on the same page with that yes. We have a breadth of experience that's really good, and so that's where this list came from, was all of our minds kind of placing stuff into here. But to split it up into the categories, what I really wanted to talk about was sort of the feel of the movies, that you could kind of split them up into different groups. So there were these movies that were about external unknowns, things that were from somewhere else that invaded, and we felt a fear about them as humans, and that's how they made it into a movie. And then there were these other things that were industrial accidents, so nuclear waste or electricity gone wild, and it created something that we couldn't control. And then there were also evolutionary fears, which is slightly different because it was things that would evolve into something else. So the world was changing around us and we weren't keeping up somehow. And that was scary to us. And I think it made really interesting cinema because of that. And that's not even to start talking about the tech that went beyond our control, which was another really good place that a lot of these stories came from. And then as we were talking about it, we couldn't not mention the monster horror or cryptid genre of movie, because it's very different from the gothic horror, which is, its own kind of thing, Dracula and Frankenstein. And Frankenstein's weird because it kind of splits the difference between the two, right? Where it's science fiction, but at the same time, it's got that very gothic feel to it. And at least the one we mentioned here is very different, and it feels good to kind of have it as a science fiction movie.
Yeah, some people say that Frankenstein is the first science fiction novel, which I would grant. I think that's a good, you could do that, but I don't know that I would say that the movie fits in this science fiction, what we're talking about. Right. And it could be disputed. I kind of brought up the whole monster horror / cryptid category, and I recognize that it could be disputed whether that's actually a sci-fi category. But if you go look up some of these things, they're in, they're creatures and monsters that are clearly, I don't know, they feel science fiction to me. So I kind of wanted to call them that. Yeah.
No, I like that. And it almost fits that external unknowns, but doesn't quite. So I like it being its own category too.
Yeah.
So that's really good. So speaking of the external unknowns, I'd kind of like to start there because I think we got the mother of all. Oh, go ahead.
Before we get to can we kind of define the eras? Like I want to kind of a little bit, if we can talk a little bit about the times, because 1977 is when Star Wars came out. And so that's that's where we kind of, as our end point. But would you say the beginning point is like 1950, like post World War II?
I would say yes. And now David threw it because right beforehand he dropped one on us that's from the 30s, which is good. And we definitely need to reference. And I think we need to start with the 50s because that's the golden age of science fiction. It's the time where comic books started appearing. It's the time where these movies really were able to do stuff with special effects that we recognize today as special effects.
Yep.
Whereas previous to that, it would have been silent movies, or the movie would have been so kind of cut up that it was hard to recognize special effects in it. It was like they had to cheat the special effects in really weird ways, and that didn't feel right in some cases. So yeah, I think that the 50s is kind of the earliest spot we're talking about, except for with one case, and we'll get that, we'll mention that one especially. But yeah, and then it goes all the way up to the 70s, so it almost butts right up against Star Wars. But then you really do see this huge shift where there stopped being movies quite like this for about a decade, maybe two. And then we'll close out with talking about some of the newer stuff that's come out that's still in this classic sci-fi range. So if you're looking for new stuff too, we're gonna get there eventually. So don't worry about that.
Good.
But awesome. Yeah. All right. So to start off, I want to go back to the one that I think even if you've never seen it, I think everybody knows this one, and it's The Day the Earth Stood Still, which is a 1951 black and white science fiction movie. And it's just weird. It has nothing to do with
Keanu Reeves.
Right.
It must be said.
Right. And so I to start off with this one's black and white. So the special effects are very limited, but they're kind of that cinema trope, I think is what they called it, where they would kind of blur the film by like just shining an extra light on it, and it would cause the lasers to appear, and so that's what passes for special effects. And then the thing that shows up is this robot that has come from outer space to kind of warn us about an impending doom, and we, of course, as humans, just proceed to try and destroy it, shoot everything we can at it, and nothing helps. But the robot itself is like very obviously a man in a cardboard outfit that's been painted silver so that it looks very interesting on the black and white screen.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you talk about like how it's the unknowns. I mean, this is right around the time. Again, this came out in 1951. This is around the time when we started to get UFO reports around. We talked about Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, and we talked about this on that podcast, when people started seeing UFOs, and whether it was the movies influencing people or the people influencing the movies, it might have been a little of both. And so this idea of visitation from other worlds, this is when it started, that the people started to think about that in a realistic sense. Previously we had future aliens, like future Earth interacting with future aliens, but this is aliens coming to us now. And what's their motivation? Why are they coming here? What could they possibly want from us if they can travel between worlds and we can't? So their motivations must be, well, they say they're here to help us, like in this one, but they also have weapons that can utterly conquer us without a second thought. And and it's fascinating culturally thinking how that expresses a fear that people had about these external threats. And that's also around the time of the rise of the Cold War and that as well, and these external threats that people were experiencing.
Right. And I love this movie too, because I think it fits in such a weird place, because it came out in 51, which is actually really early for even golden age science fiction.
Well, it's when the atomic age had just, the concept of we have this whole new thing and the world is different now.
Right.
Yeah. And this was a way of dealing with it, because I think we were starting to see in ourselves a tendency towards destruction, and realizing that was going to end poorly.
Right.
And so even before the Cold War, even before, all of that, we recognized that there was a danger in the just wanton destruction that we were willing to commit to in order to be right, or to defend ourselves, or, to stop a threat from invading. And so it's interesting because, and it's always interesting watching these things too, when you're born 3 decades after they come out, because I read Childhood's End, which is an Arthur Clarke book that's very similar. But that book didn't come out until 2 years after this movie. So, contextually, it's kind of like it would have been all happening at the same time. Like everybody's minds were kind of going the same direction with this invading force that wanted to bring us peace and saw that we were willing to destroy ourselves.
There's actually a plot element, which is that the reason the aliens came is because they saw we had developed rockets and atomic weapons. And that was, now that we had that power, it's in fact that's part of it. If, we notice this, you have the power to kill yourselves, to destroy your entire planet. And so we've come to help you with that. And that's the thing is we were facing, as humanity, for the first time an existential threat. Like wars were bad, as World War II was, but the idea of a war that could destroy everyone was a very new thing, and you could see it playing out in our pop culture, like this movie.
Right, and I think it's really interesting. This one's we have modern movies that kind of split the line between this one and the one we're going to talk about next, which is War of the Worlds.
Yep.
And the invading force is not there to bring us peace, but to destroy us, to claim our land, and to be the conqueror and move in and take everything that is ours. And so, Independence Day fits much more with this one, right? With the War of the Worlds concept,
right? Where
the aliens invade, their interest is in harvesting us and in taking over the Earth, rather than in simply bringing us peace from the stars. So a much darker version of this external unknown,
right,
that comes in. And this came out only 2 years later, so it's really not very far off from The Day the Earth Stood Still. But it existed in forms before this too, because it's an H.G. Wells story, and it had been played on the radio very dramatically without people knowing that it was real, and it played to the point where it was kind of like it was newscasters actually casting the news of this thing happening. And man, I would have loved to have experienced that, because I mean, obviously it would have been terrifying, but it's so interesting to live in an age where there's not enough skepticism about the radio and the media to immediately cast that out.
That's a really good point, because
True.
there was not that skepticism where, like, if people heard it on the radio, it must be true. Like they did when in the broadcast when what is his name? The famous
H.G. No, Orson Welles.
Orson Welles, right? I knew
not H.G. Wells. Orson Welles.
Yeah, H.G. Wells wrote the novel. Orson Welles did the radio broadcast. And he was trusted. And when they did the broadcast, that they started by saying this is a radio play by H.G. Wells, originally based on H.G. Wells' story. But people tuned in afterward. And so they didn't hear that part. And it wasn't like today where it's like a podcast. You picked up where it started, where you came in. And it's like, yeah, just that idea that people would be so invested. Like if you heard it on the radio, it must be true. Like,
right.
Just the innocence of that time is fascinating.
Well, and the limited number of channels that you had to be able to listen to, where you wouldn't have been able to just switch over to another channel and go, oh, okay, well, that's obviously
right.
That's obviously not, because this channel's not reporting on it.
Right.
Sometimes there was just the channel. The radio.
But the movie itself, I remember seeing this as a kid and being astounded at it. This is, even for 1953, it was very scary for a kid.
Right. And I think the brilliance of this movie is that most of the stuff is left off screen.
Yes.
And that's the way a lot of these early sci-fis played it, where they would let the action happen off screen and then had actors that were good enough to just react to something in a way that made you feel what was happening.
Right. And the design of the various props, like the ships were not typical saucers. They were that weird, almost like a manta ray thing with that cobra-like head coming out. And it was like, snakes, people are afraid of snakes. And it just evoked the idea of a snake and the weird, creepy arm. And all you saw was the arm of the alien reaching out,
right.
and that's all you needed to see. It's scary, it's just awesome. But yeah, it's just such a great, but also a great story of people. And again, I think it evoked the Cold War fears, that idea of being invaded, of a war that could destroy all. I have a very vivid memory of the people gathered in the church praying in this one. I mean, that was such a vivid scene. This is a great movie.
And the way they played with light was so interesting, because they did so many different colors of light, and it's you could really tell that it was someone who had thought about bringing war and that sense of terror to just a very common place, like the middle of a city where people were living, and it played out really well. It did its job. It made you feel that fear of being invaded. And for all the special effects that we can put in things today, sometimes it's just that simple stuff that
less is more,
allows you to immerse yourself. Yeah, definitely less is more.
I think that I always say constraint is always the brainchild of genius. It's like it's when you constrain, when you have to figure out how to do with less. I think sometimes that makes a better thing. And speaking of the special effects, one thing I want to mention was the sound of the laser beams from the alien ships was reused in Star Trek the original series as the photon torpedo sound, which is basically hitting a cable with a hammer, under tension. So yeah, I just like I love that they reuse this stuff. Like you'd listen to like the famous Wilhelm scream that you hear in everything, including Star Wars movies. They reused the stuff. That nothing went to waste. I just love that.
Yeah. Well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Right. Exactly.
And then I think there's some level of it being associated with those things in our mind that almost has this kind of genetic effect, right? Where you hear that sound and you know, oh, that's a science fiction sound. You're just used to listening for it.
Right.
So the next one, I have to admit, I have not actually seen Forbidden Planet. So I think this is a good mention. A 1956 movie. And from the pictures I'm seeing of it, it's one of those that has the really fun costuming to it.
Yep. And the very famous Robbie the Robot, which is one of the great classic robots of cinema. Right up there with the droids from Star Wars and the robot from Lost in Space. I mean, it's a fantastic robot. And this one, it has been so long since I've seen it. It's hard for me to talk about it at depth. But this one is different from the others because it takes place in a future period. It is in the 23rd century, but it really does kind of cover the same idea of, an unknown alien race that left behind its a legacy of these artifacts that affect us now and is having an effect on us. And it's this another external unknown. And what is it doing to us? How is it changing us? Our exposure to this alienness. And again, more of those fears of the unknown, like you mentioned. And it's very much it's a moody movie. It's very much about atmosphere and intention and drama, and not running around, phasers or blasters or whatnot that we love in our science fiction now.
Yeah. Although I will say the props are amazing. Like just from the pictures I've been looking at of it, they're the Raygun style where it's got like these, it's almost like they took the piece off of an old school telephone pole where they had the I want to say resistors, but that's not the right word. It's the conical
the insulators.
The insulators. That's the one. Yeah, so they have the insulators, and it looks like that's what they're made the gun out of. And that's I love that kind of stuff. Just the weird, bizarre design that they came up with that seems so bespoke, but actually like almost fits the science that they knew at the time, right? Of like, how would you keep this electricity from bouncing back to the person? And so they like really put some thought into these things.
Well, that's the thing, is they needed to be comprehensible to the audience. Like they needed to look at it and go, I believe that as a weapon. It couldn't be too wacky or far out. And that's one of the great things that with it. And the parts that they used were often just normal, everyday, stuff that they had laying around that they could adapt. Famously, like in Star Wars, they did that with lots of. They had old British Sten guns that became blasters, and we all know that Luke Skywalker's lightsaber was a piece of a photography flash.
You take that back.
Well, and the famous fire spray was the lamp post had fallen outside of the ILM, and that's what they picked up and brought inside to make Boba Fett's ship.
Right,
so there you go. Sometimes it's you're limited, so you do amazing things with what you can find.
Right.
Yeah.
I always thought Forbidden Planet was great, but I had the unfortunate circumstance of watching it when I was older, and I'd already seen Naked Gun and Airplane. So Leslie Nielsen, it kind of ruined it for me. So
yeah, it's hard to take those actors out of their space when they change over to whatever it was.
If there was one actor, it's Leslie Nielsen. Yeah. Just do that one off for me.
Right.
Although I tell you what, from looking at the pictures, Pierce Brosnan could play the mad scientist in that one all day long. Like he looks amazingly similar to the actor.
Oh, right.
That's in that role.
Walter Pidgeon. That's right.
Yeah. Maybe remakes in order. Here we go. Let's do it.
They remake everything else. May as well remake
they
this.
do. Why not?
Yeah.
Just keep the original Rayguns, right? So kind of moving away from the external unknowns, I think one of the other big things that was happening was there was a lot of atomic testing that was going on, and a lot of new fangled chemistry type things that were happening. Electricity was generally pretty scary to people as it was moving further and further into society in the way that we were using it. And so there was a whole genre of fiction that rose up that was about industrial accidents causing something to happen. And so we've got a few, I think, really good representative movies here. And we got to start with the big one, because
Literally.
yeah, I mean, the big one, right? You start with Godzilla, and Godzilla was a 54 movie, still in black and white. So, you know, didn't have to be, but was, and was a Japanese movie. So this is probably one of the first really prominent foreign films to come into the States and kind of make its way through. I don't know if you guys know this about it, but if you've seen the American version of it, there is an entire American plot line placed on top of the the Japanese plot line for it. Yeah, so all the stuff with the American general and how he was involved and talking with everything, just in order to translate the movie, but also in order to translate the sensibilities of the movie, they added this American plot line on top of it. So if you get a chance to watch the original Godzilla, it's a different movie and has a slightly different feel to it, where it's not as heroic. It's much more kind of daunting. Like, what are we going to do about this situation? But the basic premise is that a lizard in the Pacific is infected with this radioactive stuff that causes it to mutate and to become this gigantic lightning shooting monstrosity that destroys cities and comes up on the shores of Japan and just starts rampaging. And it's kind of terrifying. Like, it's really like, the thought of it is really kind of scary, because there's nothing they can do to stop it. No human power can even begin to keep it at bay. You know,
it's interesting because in the original, like you mentioned, Godzilla was a monster destroying, like, attacking people. It was bad.
It was not heroic. He was not a hero. He was a threat.
And then eventually, like some sort of like wrestling figure, you know what I mean? Or professional wrestler, he does how should we call it? A heel turn, and becomes like the good guy fighting off other kaiju. You know, it's because it became a beloved character in Japan. I mean, he sort of became a mascot for Japan. But I think it's interesting because I think it's obvious that this represents the fears that came out of the nuclear bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the fears of, you know, science unleashed. I mean, this whole genre that we're talking about is, you know, scary science or scary scientists. I mean, that's a whole, you know, I mean, the list of movies that have like mad scientists is, you know, the length of your arm. And this represents, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned the American version has that heroic plot line, whereas this is a much more, from the Japanese point of view, much more like we're victims of this creature. And it's almost like the way that people, you know, the Japanese psyche must have felt like after World War II and the effects of the atomic bombs there. You know what I mean? Like, yes, I know, you know, Japan was the aggressor in the war and that sort of thing, but from the point of view of the Japanese civilian and the atomic bombing, that must have felt like, what have we awakened? This beast that is destroying our cities. You know, I mean, you could really see it there in this, the way the movie goes. So it's kind of fascinating to see.
Right. And it's a direct response to the testing that was going on in the Pacific at that time too, where it was very obvious what the US was doing in testing more nuclear bombs, because we had all these little islands that we felt like we could do it on. And man, if you haven't seen any of the footage of that, definitely go look up some of the history of the bomb, because it's amazing watching what these guys would do. They wore sunglasses essentially, and they would be so close to these nuclear bombs, and that's all the protection they had was just these sunglasses.
Right.
So we didn't understand, and I think the two responses were that complete complacence, where it was like, what harm could it possibly do? Right. And then the other end was this extreme, like, it can do incredible harm. Why are you doing this still?
It's like, so for Japan, they knew what it could do, and this is kind of this film was kind of a description of, see, this has consequences. This is.
Yeah, and I think we can't go too far into this without talking about the special effects of the man in the Godzilla suit.
Yes, yeah.
That doesn't look like he can move very well, but it goes around destroying those cities fantastic. And
it's an iconic creature. I mean, that
it really
look of
is.
it, but it's limited by the fact that it has to be a dude in a suit, and so it has to have the arms and legs and stand upright. I guess the Japanese name is Gojira, not Godzilla. Gojira,
right?
Which is a portmanteau of the words for gorilla and whale, because apparently when they were initially designing it, someone came up with the idea of a cross between a gorilla and a whale, which I really want to see that. That is a weird crossing.
Wow. Why has this film not been made? This should be a kaiju. Like, this should be one of Godzilla's enemies.
That's right.
Wow. Oh man. All right. So I think that's a good one to start with. But then this is one that I really enjoyed. It's called The Blob. And it is not a nuclear accident, but a chemical accident gone wrong. And it creates this amorphous thing that is intent on just rolling around and consuming things. And so it's kind of like an acid. I don't know. Anyone who's played Dungeons and Dragons, this is a jelly, and it's rolling around, and it's or a gelatinous cube, except that it's a blob, and it's gonna roll around and eat things, and that's kind of what it does. And I've watched this movie a bunch growing up, and I didn't realize until much later that Steve McQueen is the lead actor in this movie.
The teenager.
It came out it came out in 1958, and he's not this is before he really got well known as the action hero guy, but so it is, even at the time, I think it's what would kind of qualify as a B movie, like not really your highlight movie. But it's scary, like it's creepy. I remember watching this as a kid and thinking, like, what would you do to this thing? Like again, the classic trope for these is it's indestructible, it's intent on destroying things, and it has no mind that's discernible to us as humans, all of which are just very, very scary for us as humans.
A mindless destructive force is one of our primal fears. Like, it can't be reasoned with. You cannot understand its motivation. I think that you're right. That strikes right at the heart of our lizard brain at the back of our head for scary things. I mean, it's almost kind of campy when you think about it, like The Blob. It sounds kind of like that's just silly, but when you see it, that's a whole. I mean, it can be a little creepier that way. When you see it consuming things, including people, mindlessly, just and relentlessly consuming.
Right, and no way to stop it. I think that's the scariest thing. Like, all of our advances mean nothing compared to this thing that's out there, and it strikes at that existential problem that we have of learning things about science. And I think this is it's an interesting conversation that I have with my kids a lot of times, because we'll learn about something new in the universe that can kill us, and it's there's cosmic radiation, yes, there's asteroids that will hit the planet, yes, these things are out there. And is there anything we can do to stop them? No, not really.
Yeah. Have a good night.
Yeah, great. And that's kind of where it is. Yeah.
Here's some more milk.
And as a parent, you like to comfort your children, but there are times like that where you just kind of have to be honest with them and say, yes, but it hasn't happened recently, so we can't worry about it.
And the other thing is, as a Christian, I can say, I mean, all things work out for the will of God. I mean, God's in charge. So if God wants to drop a giant flesh-eating blob on a little Pennsylvania town that consumes everything, or what have you, I mean, that's we're in the hands of God, and I think faith is the sort of thing that gives you that assurance. Where we're not going to have giant kaiju coming out of the sea, but asteroids or other dangers, and these come out of a time when faith was still important in society, and I think that was some of the assurance that people still had even then, that maybe today people aren't equipped to deal with.
Well, but it's interesting that you don't see many of these kinds of movies coming out today, right? Where we have these indestructible forces. I mean, even Godzilla was like, it became kind of ridiculous in how beatable he was in the end of all things, the new reboot of it, at least. So I don't know, it's an interesting thought to go into. So the next one we have on this list is Them, with an exclamation point, which is a 1954 movie. This one's one that I remember seeing, and you know, it's great. But who put this one on the list?
I put it on the list. Yeah.
Oh, you're done. All right. Do you want to take it?
Well,
I'll let you. Give
what
the
I
intro
love
for
about it is it's about something that it's something that's mundane. Ants are everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
They're all over the place, and they're not a big deal, But if you made one of them 30 feet long, then it's scary. So, and it's this idea of taking something mundane, and just if you just change it enough, it becomes a scary creature that intent on destroying. Like a 25, I forget how big they were in the movie, but if you a 25-foot long ant with the strength, multiplied by the same, would be nearly indestructible and nearly unstoppable. And in this one, it's because there are a bunch of ants that were irradiated by nuclear weapon, testing or whatever it was, and it's another nuclear monster. And I think it's one of the first big bug films. There was a spider one, like a tarantula one, and then they had other ones like that.
Yeah, there was a knockoff in '57 that I know fairly well just because of a Mystery Science Theater fan called Beginning of the End, which is the same thing except grasshoppers.
That's awesome.
Oh, that would be that just sounds awful.
Well, it's Peter Graves is the lead actor, so you can't take it seriously.
Yeah, James Whitmore is in this one. That's James Arness. Yeah. It's got a pretty good cast.
James Arnett, yes,
it's got Santa himself in it, right?
That's right.
So I think these movies they were great because they were campy, but then at the same time they were able to couch that kind of terrifying reality of what we're doing to the world and how we're changing the world. Before that was something that was on everybody's mind in a really big way. So kudos to these producers that saw that opportunity and really ran with it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so last one in this industrial accidents and scary science is Honey, I Blew Up Attack of the 50-Foot Woman.
Yes.
Which it's definitely worth a mention. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, it's really campy. I mean, it really kind of plays up some stereotypes of about women in the 50s and that sort of thing. But it's this idea of, what if a person was made huge? How would we deal with that? How would that person deal with it? What would it do to them mentally, and physically? And it, I mean, we don't need to spend a lot of time on it, but I just thought it was kind of fascinating as an example of this genre of what science, scary science, can do to humanity. And it's a representative of that idea.
And it's actually really gender forward for its time period too, which I thought it's kind of an interesting look at at women and where they fit into society, and then what happens if you give a woman power in that situation where she has autonomy and can dictate the rules for herself,
right?
And the way that it's dealt with too over the course of the movie is really interesting, because they try negotiating with her because she's a human, so she should be able to be negotiated with, but they've made such a complete mess of it by the time they get to that point that she's not willing to participate in conversations with them.
Right.
And it's interesting to see like the autonomy that she still has. And she's not a monster per se, but it is just outside of the bounds of what's allowed.
Well, and it goes to the women's empowerment in its beginnings, because her motivation is she's got a philandering husband that she takes revenge on. I don't want to give the plot, the ending. I don't want to spoil the ending of a 70-year-old movie, but that's her motivation she's made huge in the sense of she's given all this power to enact her will. And so it does kind of reflect some of that aspect of society at the time too, where the women's movement was just getting going and women's empowerment.
Definitely. So I think that kind of covers those. And interestingly, those are all the like 1950s. So external unknowns, the industrial accidents, those were really that early era of trying to wrestle with nuclear technology and figure out how science, because science was changing the world in dramatic ways that we weren't expecting at that point. And so, you know, pharmaceuticals were rising. There was this mass transit was happening. You could fly places on next to no charge at all and be there in no time. Mm-hmm. So the world was really opening up in a very big way.
That now.
Yeah, it would be nice if we could get back to that, right? And so that's kind of, I think that's where a lot of that came from. And then we move into the 70s, and I want to talk about a couple of these from the 70s, and we'll touch back further back than the 50s in this group here. But this is about the kind of evolutionary fears. So we're starting to realize that that the world's changing, that things are changing, but there's like a natural progression to it. And the idea of the Superman that kind of started with the German concept of the Übermensch, the superhuman person, has moved into the ideas of science fiction that have come up, and we get some movies like well, we'll go back to the 30s first, because I think that's a good one to go back to. We'll start with the Flash Gordon, and which is a fantastic look at a superhuman in the future. And so, David, you brought this one up because, and I think this was a great one to kind of touch off on here. So do you want to talk about this one?
Well, I mean, Flash Gordon's kind of in one way it was a major throwback, but on the other hand, it was kind of a leap ahead where, I mean, it was a modernish guy, but thrown into this, you know, other world where, an alien planet with in their spaceships and rocket ships, but on the other hand, there's also a lot of sword fighting. There are cardboard swords, but they were still so, you know, they really did these were serialized adventures. They weren't like these grand storytelling things. They were just little segmented adventures that were told at the beginning of the real movie, right before the real movie happened back in the day. But it started giving people ideas about things like space flight and aliens, and it was just touching on what could be out there in terms of adventure. It didn't, there wasn't always there wasn't the threat and the menace that happened in the atomic age per se, but except, the campy, there were, all the villains were all played for camp. And, I mean, nowadays we cringe at the special effects, but they were really trying to push that this could be fun and an adventure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Back then.
And I put on here around the same time, there were these another series that was very similar. That was H.G. Wells' Things to Come. And they were same kind of thing where it was these short little cuts of story that kind of were shown before movies. And they're all really interesting too, because they fit this sort of like idealistic future that things are much better. Things are better for people, but then also that they had like these undertones to them that maybe they weren't perfect. Everything was nicer, but there was also dangers in some of the things that we were exploring. And so I love those because I think they're really indicative of that pre-golden age sci-fi. And then we get into the golden age sci-fi, which is all the kind of like industrial nuclear stuff. And then we come back to these 1970s classics that I think are really fantastic. So I'm going to start with Logan's Run on this one. And this is one that I know I should probably have my sci-fi card completely revoked for never having seen this one. So I'm going to have to let you guys talk about it.
This is a very trippy 1976 film. It's so much a product of its era. You had So I feel like this era, the evolutionary fears, it also encompassed this idea that we were destroying our planet, destroying our environment. There was a lot of environmentalism. This is the era in which we realized we needed to, have clean water and not poison the atmosphere. and a lot of these were also imagining that kind of future as well. But this one imagined this like utopian society where, you know, free love, everyone was good looking and young. And then as you dig into it, it's almost like The Lottery, that the famous short story. As you dig into it, you realize that utopia comes at a horrific price, which is that we maintain the population and the consumption of resources by killing everyone when they reach the age of 30. So there are no old people, only young people. And it's this authoritarian government. And then you have these enforcers, and one of the enforcers is this guy Logan. And when they have a runner, someone who refuses to accept their fate, they have to hunt them down for the good of society. And so it's looking at this idea of, you know, because in the 70s, we thought we were going to run out of food and run out of resources, you know, soon. You know, the Malthusians thought we were going to all be starving by 1990. And so the people are sort of confronting this idea of how would a society deal with it. And they had a pretty scary face of it here. I thought that was fascinating that they said, you know, maybe we would have to kill people in order to you know, with that kind of population control. So fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's one that that even if you haven't seen it, that the story rings through from that era. And this was an era where there was a massive starvation happening throughout the world, and some interestingly scientific advances about how to grow wheat in better quantities with better quality were the things that saved the world. And it really was a food issue. There was a food shortage that ended up being solved by science, which is as science fiction as you can get.
And timeline wise, I can't remember if Logan's Run happened before or after there was a real shortage in gasoline at the time.
It was after, yeah.
Okay.
So 76. So it was just after the OPEC shortages of the early 70s.
So the idea of scarcity was probably really real to them at that point,
right?
To the audience. And
so people had a life clock in their hand, and when it reached zero, that was when they had to die. You know, that sort of thing. And there's an interesting 2011 movie that sort of played on this concept a little bit called In Time, starring Justin Timberlake.
Oh my gosh, yes, I forgot about that one.
Yeah, where people had time as a limited resource, and people could spend their time in different ways, and the rich had more time that they could waste, and the poor had very little time. And you had this one rich guy who had all the time in the world, quote unquote, who didn't want it, and he ends up getting accused of murder and goes on the run and that sort of thing. But it's interesting that concept, a similar concept of limited resources, a limited resource of time in life, and how youth is celebrated, but in a horrific way. You know, a culture of that focuses on youth to the exclusion of the elderly. You know, I thought it was fascinating that they made that movie like that.
I forgot because it's a time in that society. Time literally was money, and everyone stopped aging at 25 or 30 ish.
Right.
And they had a timer built in on their arms that would just start counting down at that time, and you could keep refilling that time clock as you worked. But it got harder and harder to make up enough time.
It's like crypto.
Yep, pretty much.
It's
yeah.
like mining crypto. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
That's almost exactly what mining crypto is. That's weird.
Yeah.
Kind of creepy. So in the same kind of theme, I wanted to bring up Soylent Green because that's one that has to be mentioned. This Charlton Heston movie. So we're going to do two in a row for the Charlton Hestons here. So we got Soylent Green came out in 73. And
set in the year 2022, by the way.
Huh.
That's creepy.
Well, and then I don't know if you guys have seen the product Soylent that has been out on the market right now.
Did people not realize like what marketing?
I've avoided that because of
yeah.
I've avoided that because of that.
I'm absolutely certain that the people that made it
did it on purpose.
were well aware of what they were doing
Yeah.
and why they were doing it, because you can't not be. And they keep swearing that they didn't have any clue until someone told them. And I'm like, yeah, sure you didn't. Whatever.
Yeah, right.
But if you don't know the famous line from Soylent Green, right? This is the one we're going to spoil the end on, guys, because if you talk about this movie, you have to talk about the end of the movie and then kind of work your way backwards. The whole world is starving, and the very end of the movie is Charlton Heston being carried out on a stretcher and grabbing someone's arm and saying, "Soylent Green it's people, it's people,"
Right.
in his in his way. And it's a really interesting look at that absence of resources and the value of human life. And I thought there was one really, really deep scene in this one that is kind of a throwaway moment, but it's so interesting, where he's a police officer investigating a crime, and he goes into this apartment and is talking to the woman in the apartment and realizes that she's furniture, and begins talking to her in a different way, because he realizes that she is literally furniture that belongs in the apartment. So whoever is in the apartment owns her, and she is there as a piece of furniture in the apartment. And she has to do this because otherwise she would starve. So there are people that are selling themselves into slavery because otherwise they will die outside of that economy.
Yeah, and so it's about overpopulation, which was a huge concern at the time, like I was saying before with the Logan's Run, about lack of resources. And so the Soylent Corporation supplies all of the world's food. There are no more animals in the world, or plants even, I think, or something like that, or food
I'm
plants.
pretty sure plants are
minimal, yeah.
Yeah. And they have a series of different wafers that are the world's food, called Soylent Red, Soylent Yellow, and then the latest product, Soylent Green. And it turns out that because they just could not harvest enough, I guess, plankton or something that they claimed.
There's the plankton, like the plankton that they claimed to be harvesting it from, it all died out. The oceans were just too poisonous.
So the last resource that they had available was people. And so they were harvesting people because that was the one thing that the world had in abundance. And as you can see, like from what you were saying, Thomas, was like treating people like furniture and treating them like food. And it shows the horror of a society that treats people as stuff, not as human beings, not as creatures made in the image and likeness of God, that sort of thing. And so in the end, our detective is the one who figures out that the Soylent Green that people are rioting to get a hold of to eat is made out of people that have been literally scooped off the street. They when there are riots, they have these big trucks with scoops that scoop up people and take them away. And unbeknownst to most people, they're turned into food. It's really horrifying.
Yeah, and it very like a really interesting movie though. Like going back and watching it doesn't fit any sort of anything that was going on at the time, except to say that it was a science fiction movie. And so it's a very classic science fiction. And it's interesting that Charlton Heston kind of made a career out of these too. Like he did a few of them.
The Omega Man was another one he did. Yeah.
And they I don't know if that he was the only actor that was willing to kind of take on these roles, or if he just got pigeonholed into them, or what. But to go from Moses to
so after 10 Commandments, you have to do something to break out of that, I guess.
Right? I guess.
Well, he did a lot of. He was very busy in the 70s. I mean, he did these. He did another genre that was popular was disaster movies.
Right.
Airplane crashes, burning buildings. The Towering Inferno. All that sort of stuff. What was the ship that flipped over? I forget which was.
Poseidon Adventure.
That was a whole nother genre. It's not science fiction, but a whole nother genre of the era. And he was in a lot of that too. So, yeah.
So you could say Charlton Heston was a genre.
Yeah, he really was. He worked a lot.
How it feels. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll move on to the other one that kind of fits this evolutionary fears. And this one's really, this is a movie that you could almost say breaks the mold in its own way, similar to the way that Star Wars did. This movie changed a lot of
genre.
ideas. Yeah. And this is Planet of the Apes. So 1968, Planet of the Apes, again, Charlton Heston in it. Really just
fantastic.
Such a bizarre movie.
It's such a great movie too, though.
But the end, but just like Soylent Green, the ending is what
Right.
ties it together.
Yeah.
And that's true. And this is one where I won't give away the ending to it. If you haven't seen this movie, it's definitely worth a watch.
Right.
It's a man out of time. That's kind of the premise of it, is that he's been transported to this other place. A man that a human that wakes up somewhere where he's not that he doesn't recognize. It's very strange and different from what he knows. And it's all of the humans are apes instead. So all of the
animals,
sentient species
right.
are now have been replaced by these apes that are just like humans in many ways, and very different from humans in many ways. And so the movie's kind of this exploration of what that would be. And if you've caught any of the recent Planet of the Apes, you kind of know where everything's going.
Yep.
But you really start with this one and then work your way through the rest of them, because it is a very interesting movie in its own right, and
It's
has
classic.
a lot of really great beats to it, and was very, very ahead of its time in the way that it dealt with some of these issues.
Get your hands off me, you damn dirty ape. Just
You always have
great
to
line.
quote Charlton Heston.
No, I'm kidding. No kidding.
It's
And,
the most quotable man.
yeah. I mean, and I remember watching these. I loved these movies as a kid. Beneath the Planet of the Apes, and they got really kind of weird as the series went on.
Mhm.
But I loved the concept and the idea of, again, we were exploring our humanity. What does it mean to be human, and how do we compare ourselves to the other animals that are sort of like us, like apes? We were beginning to communicate, like Coco the gorilla that can do the sign language, and beginning to wonder what does it mean that these creatures are kind of like us, and exploring that, and how should we be treating them, and how should we treat the planet around us. So I really like that this does that sort of exploration.
Yeah, it's a really good, and I think that's the one thing that I like about good pre-Star Wars sci-fi, and that's what we'll call it, and then we'll get to some of the ones that are post-Star Wars too. But the good pre-Star Wars sci-fi are the ones that get us to ask questions about ourselves and to really start being introspective about what it means to be a human, and what we're doing to the planet, where we're going with things, and it's not necessarily trying to cast a particular answer, but just to open those thoughts and to get us to really dive into them. So we'll move on to our next group, which is kind of so we've gone the evolutionary things beyond our control, or the planet beyond our control, into the tech that's beyond our control. So the things that we're making that are actually outside of our ability to keep them controlled. And the two that I came up with, or the two that I think we came up with, are really representative and really good. You have 2001: Space Odyssey, which came out in 1968, and I hate that Jack's not here to say this one, but Jack filled me in, and I had to go look this up because I was amazed by it. This was a novel, but the novel was written in tandem with the movie. So it wasn't that the novel came out first and then the movie, or the other way around. It was that Arthur Clarke was writing this novel along with building the movie with Stanley Kubrick. Yeah. And Stanley Kubrick's amazing, and this is such an incredible movie that the way that it's put together. And I've got so many stories that I could go into about this one, just specifically.
It needs its own episode. Yeah,
I know, right? It's kind of by itself, but the idea that technology might get away from us at some point, and this is pre AI, this is 1968. So this was AI was something that really, really intense scientists were thinking about.
But it was still just completely imaginary. It was essentially magic. Yeah.
Yeah. It was magic. And the creepiness of the AI in this movie is just incredible.
Well, that's the thing. This movie, it starts out as an alien movie. You know what I mean? It's about so you would almost say, "Oh, Fear of the Unknown." That's one of those fear, but it really turns into the technology. It's not really necessarily about the aliens that they are going to go see and the monolith, but most of the movie is about this AI that cracks up. And what happens when you're way out in space all alone with a crazy AI, which has become a whole genre of movies and video games, classic video games we can talk about. And so like the AI itself was so well done, Hal, because it's that calm, creepy voice.
Calmness.
What are you doing, Dave? Don't do that, Dave. And it's so like, it's not as if it was like yelling at him, It was just like, and it's disembodied, and all you have is this light. And it really, it's sort of this existential fear in us again, that weirdness. And for everything, I think people's reactions to AI and to artificial intelligence and all the things we talk about AI today in 2022, a lot of it is layered on top of our reactions to HAL and 2001: A Space Odyssey.
I would absolutely agree, 100%. Just the calculating nature of it. There are many, many, many good science fiction stories written about the math that goes into deciding things. And so, even going back to talking about like Logan's Run, it's just survival. We need the human race to continue. So we pick an arbitrary age and just everybody dies at that point. And that's it, and that cold calculating ability of it. And you see it kind of reflected in some of the modern science fiction movies, just as a shorthand where, Marvel's, the whole Ultron, the thing is really wrapped up in that cold calculating artificial intelligence, and it's almost expected at this point that that's what we think of AIs,
right?
Or even if you just want to think of cold calculating math, let's wipe out half of the population of the universe.
Thanos, right? That cold utilitarian approach to things, yeah, and 2001. I'm making notes here. We're going to do episodes on some of these stuff we're talking about, because we really ought to talk about them at greater length than we have here.
Yeah, definitely. But I think this is one to go back and watch, because it's visually very incredible. The soundscape is intense. And many of the things that you see in Star Wars wouldn't be without this movie having been done. A lot of the ways that they dealt with things in space, and how they moved and how they shot them with the cameras. This is where it really
Kubrick
started.
Came up with it, yeah, right.
And then my other one for this is the movie Westworld.
Yes.
So this is one came out in 1973. One of Michael Crichton's earlier movies. So maybe not what you would expect for Michael Crichton, but definitely what you would expect for Michael Crichton.
Right.
It's 100% a Michael Crichton movie, but before he became what he was later. And if you've seen the TV show at all, then you kind of know where this movie heads, where this movie is leading toward.
But a lot more clothing.
But right. Well, yeah.
It did start the trend of Michael Crichton with killer theme parks.
Yes, definitely.
That's true. That's very true. And I think that's kind of what. So the two things that I think we're really afraid of with technology are, one, we're going to create something that outpaces us, which is kind of the 2001 concept, is that it's a thing that we don't fully understand that is better than us in many ways. And then two, that we're going to use this technology to kind of create an oblivion for ourselves, where we are just using it for pleasure and escaping into this other reality. And then that other reality is going to not treat us very well.
Right. It's almost like the dangers of treating technology frivolously, and that there will be, there are consequences for not respecting technology. And it's almost what this, because what happens is, if you don't know, is it's a theme park where you have Western world, medieval world, Roman world. And in those worlds, you get to act out whatever the genre is. And there are robots to play the non-player character roles. And the robots go haywire and start killing the guests. And how do you escape from that? And it's, they're relentless and they're following. I mean, it is a lot like Jurassic Park when you think about it. The attractions get loose and start killing the guests, which is the shorthand.
Well, what did Michael Crichton have against theme parks. That's
I don't know. But who would you rather face, a T-Rex or Yulebrenner? I don't know.
I don't know.
Yulebrenner's
pretty terrifying in this.
Yeah.
Oh man,
this
I saw
movie.
this as a kid, and just the way that the robot just kept coming and coming and would not be stopped. It was pretty creepy. It was scary. Yeah.
So yeah, definitely a good. I think that the best science fiction tends to have that scariness to it, where it forces you to feel uncomfortable,
Right?
with how comfortable you are, especially once you're around the things that are technology that you're using on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the last one here, I do want to bring up the cryptids. I think that the monster horror genre, and the unknowns, but not from somewhere else, just kind of things that are outside of current science, is a really good theme to run with. And so the one that I think it's a good encapsulation of it is going back to the 50s for this one, Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Yes,
which is a great one. Dom, I think this one was yours that you put in. That you wanted to add.
Yeah, it's not a creature that's like made from radiation or something. It's a long lost, creature from, the prehistoric era that is discovered in the depths of the Amazon or something like that. But it encapsulates a lot of that idea of that unknown, the what are we doing to the world around us? The unknown, it's in our own world, our fears about that, of what's just beyond the line, the what you can see from the light of the campfire sort of thing.
Right.
That idea. But we should also, we can't talk about this without also talking about the special effects, which is, it was the first 3D movie. I think it was the very first 3D movie that was in wide release. I'd have to double check that. Yeah, it was filmed in 3D. They used gray it's still black and white, but gray polarizing filters, and people were freaking out in the theater. People were like losing their bladders and like running, screaming from the movie because it was so real. I mean, we look at it as how quaint, how backwards those people were. But when you think about it, people just didn't like have an experience of that. Now I put on an Oculus and I stand in front of Darth Vader and I get, the blob sweats because it seems real to me there. It's just whatever, it's what we're used to. So it made a huge impact on people, just as being a 3D movie as well. Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting because this kind of movie only exists because science was closing off so many venues of discovery, right?
Yep.
Like previous to the 1900s, previous to the 20th century, you could tell a tale about a wolf in the woods and people would be scared of it. And then you get into the 20th century and it's kind of like, well, no, that's just a wolf, or that's just your imagination running away with you. I think my classic right now is I've talked to my kids about where legends come from and how people create these ideas of like demons in the woods and stuff. And you just look at an elk and the fuzz that it has on its antlers when it starts tearing off, and it looks like there's just skin and gore hanging everywhere on these antlers. And so you can just imagine somebody walking out in the woods before they have the science to know about that and seeing that and going, what is that thing? It's horrible. It's terrifying.
Right. And we didn't have flashlights.
Coming up with a story.
Yeah. You didn't have, you just, whatever that was in the dark. Yeah.
And their eyes shine at you. It's just all sorts of levels of scary,
Yep.
So, and that's kind of where this kind of thing comes from, is like, we're closing off these venues of things that it's an exploration. Like even now today, if you had something like this, there's almost like a tendency in movies even to show at least one person finding out how they can exploit this thing, right?
Right.
Because they're like, it's a discovery. Oh my goodness, how can I make money from it?
Like Aliens is a classic of the more modern genre. Right.
There you go. Bingo. So yeah, that's I think it's a neat niche for the science fiction, because it only exists because science has pushed so much into that realm of, well, we understand it better now. And so obviously this kind of thing would be very bizarre. So before we wrap up entirely, one of the things I want to do is talk about after Star Wars. And I don't want to talk about the movies that take Star Wars as notes and do the incredible, crazy special visual effects stuff. But I want to talk about the movies that we like that fit this more classic genre. They may have special effects, but the big actiony story or the special effects aren't the main focus of the science fiction portion of the story. And so we can just really kind of quickly go through these and talk about why they're good and why they fit this this theme of it. And one that I want to mention that's a kind of a lesser known film to start off with is this one called Sunshine.
Yeah, I don't know that one.
It's a really interesting movie. If you haven't seen it, it's about this. There is a catastrophe, and this group of scientists needs to deliver something to the sun, and they have to do it as a trip themselves. They have to go themselves. They can't just send a probe because it's something that has to actually be done along the way. And they load up on the ship and as a team are headed towards the sun. And as they're getting closer, they all begin to unravel. Like their mental state just begins to kind of deteriorate and things start going haywire and the ship starts breaking. It's a really neat look at a mission that's obviously impossible, obviously suicidal, but at the same time, these people have volunteered to go on it and are trying to complete the mission. And fits this sci-fi genre of like, what do we do against these odds that are beyond our control, and can we hold it together well enough to complete that kind of a science fiction mission? So definitely a good one to check out if you get a chance. Yeah, and lesser known. It's a lot of lesser known actors, I think, that were in it.
Although like it's got Chris Evans and Michelle Yeoh and Benedict Wong. I mean, recognizable names.
Yeah, I definitely recommend that one. You guys want to grab one from this list that was yours, and we'll just kind of go through and hit them all that way.
I'll go with Gattaca just because that was college. We had got to have premium cable for free for through some package deal, so I got to watch it a gazillion times. But just it's kind of the concept of people being perfect, or engineering people to. The main character is actually quite imperfect, but has to fit himself into a perfect world.
Right.
And that's I thought that's a very interesting concept, where it's just like they've managed to, it's not like Logan's Run where everyone's like perfectly young or anything, but they've literally managed to try to engineer the flaws out of themselves,
eugenics.
Eugenics, but in most ways people are just they're just as flawed as ever. Right. Because the main character, Ethan Hawke, has many physical ailments, but does very well at disguising them. And he takes the place of this man Jude Law's character, who is physically perfect and has had everything going for him, but really just, he's in a wheelchair and he doesn't want to live it. He's this perfect man, doesn't want to, he doesn't want to live anymore. And he's using Ethan Hawke to be him and keep him in the life that he's accustomed to, but he's miserable. This perfect man is miserable.
Yeah, and it really encapsulates the fears of the late 20th century of the perfection of humanity and trying to perfect humanity through genetic manipulation. And what does it mean for discriminating against people and all that sort of stuff? So yeah, it really is a product of its time.
This was last night I saw this right along with Mr. Science Theater 3000. I got to see this movie on repeat right when I'd almost broken my back, so I was on the flat on my back watching shows for all summer.
Oof.
And the idea of being physically perfect and all that kind of stuff sounded pretty appealing at the time. So this movie kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, it's a really good deep look at what it means to have a perfect society and the cost associated with that. Very, very one scene kind of movie. Like it has very few setting changes throughout the course of the movie, and the ones that do happen are very impactful. So lots of good cinematography, lots of good fantastic acting, and really tight script went into this movie. So definitely recommend that one as a more classic sci-fi. How about you, Dom? You got one on this list?
So I wanted to talk about the 2013 Tom Cruise film Oblivion, which is another one of these explorations of what does it mean to be human. So it takes place in our near future. Earth has been nearly destroyed after a war with ETs. Most of humanity has moved to Titan, but this guy Jack Harper, and he's helped by this other woman. I forget the name, Vika, something like that. And his job is to maintain these drones that are used to fight against the remaining ETs that are scavengers left on the planet, these aliens. And as you watch the film, you really get your perceptions, like the assumptions that we start with are really twisted and turned around. I don't want to spoil it, but all your expectations and understandings really get flipped on their head, and it's a really dystopian kind of a film, but it's a real exploration. Again, another one's explorations of what does it mean to be human? How, what does it mean to be me? And even more specifically, how do I define me and myself? Am I my memories? Am I the identity I assigned to myself? Am I the flesh and blood that exists? Am I the material and stuff? So it makes for a very interesting film in that case. I mean, it's not the greatest film, but it was. I felt like it sort of represents that classic sci-fi genre.
It's a good one. Yeah. Another one I wanted to bring up. This one's kind of off the beaten path, so let's do one more round of these because I think it's good to get as many of these out as we can. This one's a horror movie that is a really, really brilliant science fiction horror movie, but you have got to be prepared for a truly terrifying experience. It's called Event Horizon, and if you haven't seen it, it's it's just one of those. It's hard. It's hard to. It's Sam Neill and Lawrence Fishburne are in it, and it's a ship that has made the first warp, the first leap by folding space time, was lost and has suddenly reappeared, and so we're going out to investigate what happened to it, and the discovery is that it went somewhere not good. That it didn't just fold space-time, but it really did a much bigger job of going places that it shouldn't have gone. And it's amazing because it's like it touches on all of those fears of the unknown that kind of push the limit of what is still science fiction and into kind of mystical fiction. But it handles it in a very interesting way and asks a lot of really good questions about what the limits we're willing to go to advance science are. And so I put it on here with the caveat that you have to be in for a horror flick that's particularly gory and really messes with your head by the end of it. So if you're in for that kind of thing, Event Horizon, very good movie for that.
Cool. So I'll mention one that we recently just had an episode on. In fact, I think it was last episode of this podcast called Interstellar, which Matthew McConaughey, it really encapsulates a lot of the genre aspects of this, the tech beyond our control, really sort of evolutionary fears is really that one. And it was a lot like 2001, except it's not really about technology, but it's about the fears of a changing world. But I also want to mention one, A Quiet Place because those are technically aliens, and but it's a small movie, and it really is that, external unknowns, these things that invade, and how do we deal with it? How do we stay together? I love that movie. We did an episode of this podcast on it, and it was such a fantastic movie. Both of them were good. The first one was really good. The second one was good too.
definitely recommend those. David, do you have one more that you wanted to highlight from this list?
I'm still recovering from Event Horizon. That was a rough one. I'm losing my sci-fi card on here. I mean, Contact. Contact was on the list. Is that the Jodie Foster one?
That's the Jodie Foster one. Yeah,
that was a good one. That it was let's say definitely not action oriented. But it was just really. I mean, it was one of those intellectual ones where it was. It was one of those ones to make you think. Like, did that really even did that really even happen? Because they get what they believe is a contact from outer space, and they go through all this stuff to make the next step to make contact, and then it's kind of left up to I won't go into details to say what Jodie, the main character, experiences, but she genuinely believes she experiences something amazing. Who's to say if that's what really happened?
Yeah,
right.
It's that interesting cross section of faith and science, and they play that up throughout the movie very, very well, where it's lots of questions about the faithful, like the religious people of the age being very against what she's doing. And then it turns out almost that same kind of feeling from what she has and from the experience that she has with it.
Which also uses the power of Matthew McConaughey, if I remember correctly.
Right.
I believe so. Yeah. Well, I think my favorite part of that movie is that they talk a lot about the golden record, which is the information that we've sent out beyond our solar system now, and it's basically a map of how to get to us, who we are, and how to speak with us in mathematical code that is understandable by anyone who can decipher glyphs, like decipher visual cues.
Right.
And it's such an interesting concept of us sending something out there about how to find us, because we don't know what's out there, and giving them a map back to us might not be great, but yeah.
And on a record too. Right. That's what I love.
Yeah.
It's like a very specific technology of a very specific time.
Yeah, but they'll figure it out, right?
Yeah, sure.
I'm sure they will. All right, so I think that'll do it for us. If you have any other movies that you think of, classic style movies or classic movies themselves that you would like to chat about, definitely contact us by letting us know on the sqpn.com/secrets, or you can check out the StarQuest Facebook page and send us an email at secrets@sqpn.com.
And I want to add, also check out brand new. We just started a new community Discord at sqpn.com/Discord. Join us here too. We have a great community starting there, and we can have a great conversation about this.
Yeah, lots of excellent discussions going on in that board too. I like being involved in it. It's great.
Yeah.
Before we close out, we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create secrets of movies and TV shows, including Peter M., Carl S., Dalton H., Hen D., and James M. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the secrets of movies and TV shows and all the shows here at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So until next time, David Handlos, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of classic science fiction.
No. Oh, wait, wrong section.
No, the Klaatu Barada Nikto. That's right. And Dom Bettinelli, thank you as well.
It's been great.
And once again, I'm Thomas Sanjurjo. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows on StarQuest.